So, in order to give us a better idea of what he's doing with his utilitarianism, Mill wants to address two main objections to his position. First, what if we can't be happy? What if we can't be happy? Now, this is a teleological moral system. It's aimed at happiness. If we can't attain happiness, then asking us to do things for the purpose of the attainment of happiness wouldn't make any sense. A moral theory can only ask people to do what it's in their power to do. Right? If a moral theory judged that I should be able to jump to the moon, I'm not able to jump to the moon. So that shows that there's something wrong with the moral theory, and not with me. Right? A moral theory can only ask you to do things you're capable of. Right? So if we can't attain happiness, this can be problematic for Mill's theory. Right? And it seems that, this objection holds a little bit of weight too, right? Because it seems that a human life, no matter how well off we are, we're going to experience some pain, some suffering, some unhappiness. Right? The Buddhists note that, there are three certainties: sickness, old age, and death. Right? We're all going to get sick at some point or another. We're going to grow old, which is accompanied with pain, and we're going to die. This is the reality of it. Right? So, what does it say about Mill's system? If we can't be happy because there's always going to be suffering and it's completely unavoidable, well, Mill wants to point out that there still might be something to be said for utilitarianism. What? Well, remember, he defined this pleasure principle in terms of pleasure and the absence of pain. There are two things to it. So even if we can't have the pleasure part, we can still avoid the pain, which is handy. Right? And if we cannot have happiness in any sort of absolute sense, right, then avoiding pain becomes all the more important. Right? But Mill wants to point out at the same time that this may be, a bit of an exaggeration to be said that there can be no happiness. Right? Rather, maybe it's just a moderate share of happiness that we get in a human life. Right? He wants to claim, and this is in my notes here, that I'm in the wrong spot. Just 1 second. Here we go. Let it be admitted that continual and perpetual pleasure is obviously impossible, and that the best a human can hope for is, from page 13, the occasional brilliant flash of enjoyment, not its permanent steady flame. Right? Now, as we saw in Aristotle, life is not seen to be a continual state of bliss, right? But life with many and various pleasures, and let it be admitted, some pain as well. Right? A happy life, by Mill's judgment here, would be one with a decided predominance of pleasure over pain when judged at its overall conclusion. Right? And not a life devoid of pain and perpetually blissful, as these objectors would have us believe. Right? So, at very least, right, even if pleasure was unattainable, avoiding pain is still handy. But some pleasure is attainable, so what Mill wants us to do is get the most out of it. Right? The next objection that Mill wants to respond to is this idea that, well, would we even be satisfied with a moderate amount of pleasure? Right? If we can't have it all, if we can't have perpetual bliss, right? Well, would it be worth it to engage in utilitarian calculations? Now, as I point out in the notes, it does seem odd that final judgment on overall satisfaction with life, the principle in action, if utilitarianism is to be worth its salt as a principle of action or morality, should be judged only at the end of its life. If the principle of utility is to govern the actual day-to-day actions of people, deferment of judgment till the end may seem like sort of a weak justification, right, for actions and the actual share of happiness that for the individual, even over an entire lifetime, may be far too moderate to justify a life also filled with pain. Now, just to clarify this a little bit, think about yourself if you were going to become a staunch utilitarian, right? Well, what you would have to do with each and every one of your actions, your career decisions, your life decisions, whether you get married or not, what sort of job you have, what sort of education you have, what you do with your free time, is calculate the greatest good for the greatest number, making this distinction between quantity and quality, right? And you would give a decided preference to qualitatively better pleasures over those that are just merely lower order and immediate kind of pleasures. Right? So this would have you doing a lot of things, and somebody who really took this seriously may be like Mother Teresa, giving their lives over to the suffering of others. This seems like a lot to ask, right? If the individual only experiences just a little bit, a moderate share of pleasure. Right? Now, what Mill wants to respond is that, well, if we look at history, lots of people do satisfy themselves with very little pleasure. Right? And what's more, our heroes satisfy themselves with almost no pleasure, giving their share of the pleasure over to others, so that others can suffer less. Right? So, what Mill wants to suggest is that there are at least two principles that help us get the most out of life, right? That constitute what Mill calls a satisfied life. They are tranquility, relaxing, right? Which allows you to be content with very little pleasure. It's not so pleasure abundant, but you're content with the little pleasures. And excitement. Anybody who's a snowboarder knows that it hurts a lot to snowboard, right? When you fall down especially. You still do it. Why? Because it's worth it, right? Because it's exciting, right? Excitement allows people to contend with a great deal of pain as a price for a little bit of pleasure that comes out of the activity. Now, Mill argues that tranquility and excitement need not be mutually exclusive and should in fact be united. So you should try to have as exciting or tranquil, exciting and tranquil life as possible in order to try and get the most out of your life. These are principles that allow you to minimize the negative effects of the dissatisfaction associated with pain and maximize every ounce of pleasure that you get. Right? But it seems still that some people, even in fairly favorable conditions, right, still don't find enough enjoyment in their lives to justify its continuance. Right? So, Mill turns to these cases next.